The blood was everywhere, and the monitor was screaming a flat, endless tone that no one in that trauma bay would ever forget, when a 26-year-old nurse named Maya Torres did something that broke every protocol in the hospital's manual and saved a man's life in the same motion. Her hands moved before her mind could stop them, cutting into the chest of a construction worker whose heart had stopped beating on a gurney, performing a field thoracotomy that nurses were never, ever trained to do. When the man's heart stuttered back to life beneath her fingers, the room fell into a stunned silence broken only by the soft beeping of a monitor finding its rhythm again, and that silence was the beginning of everything that would come. Before we go further into Maya's story, if you believe that ordinary people can carry extraordinary courage inside them, and if you believe in kindness and second chances, please take a moment to like this video, drop a comment below, share it with someone who needs a little hope today, and subscribe to Midnight Tale so you never miss a story like this one. Now, let's step back into that hospital hallway, where Dr. Richard Halloran, the hospital's chief of surgery, a man who had spent 30 years building an unshakable reputation for precision and control, stood staring at the young nurse with a mixture of fury and disbelief written across his face. Maya Torres had not always been a nurse in a spotless blue scrub uniform standing in fluorescent-lit corridors. 6 years earlier, she had been a combat medic attached to a special operations aviation unit, the kind of unit whose missions were never spoken about at dinner tables or written about in newspapers. She had knelt in the dirt of countries she was never allowed to name, her hands slick with the blood of soldiers twice her size, performing procedures that no civilian hospital would ever authorize a person of her rank to perform, because out there, in the dark, there was no attending physician to call, no operating room down the hall, no time to wait for permission. There was only the next 60 seconds, and whether the man in front of her would still be breathing at the end of them. When Maya left the military, she thought she was leaving that world behind her. She enrolled in nursing school with a quiet determination that her classmates mistook for shyness, never mentioning what she had seen, what she had done, or the friends she had lost while doing it. She took a job at County General Hospital because it needed nurses and because she needed a life that felt normal, a life where the sound of a helicopter overhead didn't send her hand instinctively reaching for a tourniquet that wasn't there. But grief and instinct do not follow the neat lines we draw for them, and on that particular afternoon, when a construction accident sent a man into cardiac arrest right in front of her eyes, and the attending physician was 3 minutes away and 3 minutes too late, something older and deeper than her training took over. Dr. Halloran had built his entire career on order. He believed in chains of command, in protocols written in blood and lawsuits, in the idea that a hospital only functioned when everyone stayed within the boundaries of their role. So when he arrived at that trauma bay and saw a nurse's hands inside a patient's chest cavity, his first emotion was not gratitude but rage, the kind of rage that comes from fear disguised as authority. He pulled her aside in front of the entire team, his voice sharp enough to cut through the antiseptic air, and he demanded to know who had taught her that procedure, certain that her answer would end her career. Maya did not raise her voice. She did not defend herself with excuses or apologies. She simply looked him in the eye, her own eyes carrying a weight that 30 years of hospital politics had never taught him to read, and she said 2 words that would change the way he saw her forever: Task Force 160. The name meant nothing to most of the people standing in that hallway, but it meant everything to the handful who understood what it represented, a legendary special operations aviation regiment where medics were trained to keep dying men alive in the 4 or 5 minutes between a battlefield and a hospital that might not exist for another hour. In that world, hesitation was not caution, it was a death sentence. The hallway went quiet in a different way then, the anger draining slowly out of Halloran's face and something else moving in to take its place, something between respect and shame. He remembered, faintly, a nephew who had served in that world and who had come home changed, quieter, carrying invisible wounds that no scalpel could touch. He looked at Maya again, this time seeing not a nurse who had broken protocol, but a woman who had been carrying an entire war inside her chest every single day she clocked in for her 12-hour shift, smiling politely at patients, charting vitals, pretending that the hardest thing she had ever done was pass her nursing boards. Over the following weeks, something shifted between them. Halloran began seeking her out, not to reprimand her, but to ask quiet questions about the things she had seen, the decisions she had been forced to make in impossible circumstances. He discovered that Maya carried a kind of clinical instinct that no textbook could teach, an ability to read a dying body in seconds, to know exactly where the next crisis would come from before it arrived. Instead of burying her talent under bureaucratic caution, he began fighting for her, pushing the hospital board to create a new pathway, a bridge program that would allow combat medics and former military corpsmen to translate their battlefield skills into advanced clinical roles, cutting through the red tape that had wasted so much extraordinary talent for so many years. It was not an easy fight. There were board members who worried about liability, doctors who resented the idea that a nurse without a medical degree could be granted expanded authority, administrators who saw only risk where Halloran now saw resource. But he had seen what Maya's hands could do when a man's life hung in the balance, and he refused to let institutional fear erase that truth. Slowly, meeting by meeting, argument by argument, he built the case that saved not just Maya's career, but opened a door for dozens of veterans after her, men and women who had spent years in the darkest, most desperate corners of the earth keeping their brothers and sisters alive, and who deserved a place in civilian medicine that honored what they already knew rather than starting them over from zero. Maya never asked to be anyone's inspiration. She still remembers, some nights, the ones she couldn't save, the names she keeps folded quietly in a part of her heart she rarely opens for anyone. But she also remembers the moment a man who had once looked at her with fury and suspicion instead stood before the hospital board and said that the finest clinician he had ever worked with had learned her craft not in a lecture hall, but on her knees in the dirt, keeping her promise to bring people home. That moment did not erase the war inside her, but it gave her something she had not expected to find in civilian life, a sense that the hardest parts of her past could still become someone else's future. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you that the people who have survived the hardest battles often become the gentlest healers among us, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it today, because stories like Maya's deserve to be told and remembered. And before we close this chapter, I want to ask you something special. If you have ever served, or if you love someone who has, comment the words, Task Force, below, so we can see how many of you are out there carrying quiet strength the world may never fully understand. Maya still works at County General today, and Dr. Halloran, now long past the age most surgeons retire, still tells new residents about the day a nurse taught him the difference between following rules and saving lives. If her story touched your heart even a little, subscribe to Midnight Tales, because there are so many more stories like hers waiting to be told, stories of ordinary people who, in their darkest and most desperate moments, become someone's miracle.